September 1st, 2020. Welcome everyone to the Holllis School Board. We normally meet at 6 p.m. on the first Wednesday of the month, but given the current COVID situation, we find the need to deviate from that practice. Chances are we'll probably be meeting again later this month, but that's to be planned and to be seen at this point. Members of the school board are volunteers from the community who have been elected to a 3-year or to serve up to a 3-year term. Our board consists of 5 members. To transact any legal business of the board, a meeting must be publicly noticed, and a quorum of the board is required, consisting of a minimum of 3 members. The 5 members are myself, Robert Mann, Terry Fareed, vice chair, Brooke Arthur is our board secretary, Amy Kellner, who is calling in remotely, and we'll address that momentarily, and who is our lead policy representative, and Carol Roy, our board representative at the Holllis Budget Committee. Dawn McMillan is our recording secretary. So at this time, I will entertain agenda adjustments.
I don't have any.
Okay, I would like one of the members to sponsor an agenda adjustment regarding class size for remote classes.
I sponsor.
Okay, so we are going to have a discussion. I'll propose add that as a 3rd bullet in our discussion section of the agenda. I think as we'll figure out what we're going to do after that discussion, if there's going to be an action or not, but let's just have a 10-minute discussion on that. So thank you, Carol, for that. I want to move to the approval of the meeting minutes.
I move to approve the Holllis School Board meeting minutes from August 19th, 2020 with the following amendments offered. Page 7, line 35, replace any with every. Page 12, line 14, replace he with Superintendent Corey.
A second.
Okay, I believe I jumped the gun just a little bit because we're going to ask Amy to also vote on these actions. So, Amy, if you could just explain your reason for being remote at this time, that would be very helpful.
Yep, this is Amy Kellner. I am participating remotely because I'm currently out of town. I am alone in the room and I can hear the proceedings.
Okay, thank you. And so any votes we'll be taking tonight will be by roll call, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, with that, we do have an active motion on the floor with amendments being made. Any discussion relating to those amendments? Seeing none, by roll call, all in favor. Tammy Fareed?
Aye. Carol Roy, aye.
Brooke Arthur, aye.
Rob Mann, aye.
Amy Kellner, aye.
Okay, thank you. Any other meeting minutes that we have to?
That was it.
That's it. Okay, so let's move right into nominations, resignations, and correspondence.
Yes, I just wanted to give the board a brief update regarding the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion in education. As I've spoken at the co-op board and the Brookline board, I've done considerable research since we talked about this about a month ago. And it's my intent to form a superintendent's advisory committee where I'll be reaching out to some of the people that brought the resolution to us, as well as some other citizens in the town, to start a discussion of how we'll look at the issue. I did look into a consultant, and the fees were very expensive. Just to do the initial data work would be about $24,000, and you could be looking at upwards of over $100,000 for a consultant to be with us for the year. In speaking to community members, I believe we have the resources in the community. So it is my intent to put this group together, and I've had some people volunteer and solicit to me. I am trying to avoid board members because it's going to be a superintendent's committee. And my goal would be to bring back the names of the advisory board and then kind of our task and our challenges, and then continue to update you probably as early as our October meeting, which we hope to get back to the first Wednesday in October and bring some normal meetings back to the board. But I just want to let you know that that work is beginning. We're also looking at, some of you may know that we use a program called Choose Love. Choose Love was developed around the social emotional learning for students, and we implemented that last year. Choose Love has added a significant component in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion in education. So we're going to look at that first because I believe it has some strong components for us, but more importantly, it has our teachers already have an understanding of the program, and we've already invested time and effort to that. But again, nothing's off the table. I'm just trying to get the information out to the community so they're aware that we are moving forward. And again, as I said at our next meeting, probably later this month, I'll be able to tell you who has been willing to serve on that committee.
Do you need any actions from the board to charge that committee?
No, actually, I'd prefer it be a superintendent's advisory,
Okay.
and then at some point, the board could decide to adopt or reject that, and it just, I'll say, probably not the best word, but it kind of insulates the board so that when they have to make their determination of what they want to do for the Holllis School District, they're just voting on recommendations that were brought forth to them by the committee, and they could accept or reject any of those recommendations.
How about amending?
Absolutely amending. The board
So
could
we
take...
can amend if we need to.
Correct. The other piece that some of our veteran board members would understand is this would also be an item that I'd want to incorporate into our work for the strategic plan, because that's an ongoing document. So it's not something I want to do just a one-shot deal and be done with it. I think it's something that we want to look at almost from the point of view is if you were a student in our elementary system right now, when you graduate Hollis Brookline High School in 13 years, if you're in the kindergarten, what do we want you to look at as a graduate? And what skills do we want you to have? So that'll also play into the co-op board is working on what we call the life of a Cavalier. So we're going to kind of do this is the skill set we want, and how do we back our way from a curriculum standpoint and integration standpoint all the way back down to pre-K and kindergarten.
So will this committee be SAU-wide?
This committee would be,
Or district
through
specific?
me, SAU-wide, but it can then be adapted to any specific district because, again, you're only getting recommendations which you could amend, and you would also control the implementation flow.
Okay.
Andy, excuse me, could I suggest that you consider including students on the committee, or at least having a student component? I think the lived experience in the buildings is known best by the students.
Could you just repeat it? Did you ask to have a student involved?
Yeah, I was suggesting, would you consider having a student component to the committee?
Yes, Mr. Barnes at the high school is looking for a student at that age level, and I have reached out to a middle schooler, and I don't think I'd go much below that, but at the same time, both individuals would be students who pretty much have progressed through our system and would have an understanding of what we do K to 12.
Would they be, or maybe you don't know this yet, but would the student input be more advisory, or would they have a voting role on that committee?
I don't know if the committee will be formally voting. They will be working towards making recommendations, so the students would have input. The voting would take place at the board level, and I would probably most likely have the committee make recommendations. But this is to me, a kind of longer view. Would want to do some public forums, would want to do some different pieces to get input, so those committee members will also be signing up for doing parts of that so that they can get the information. And then Gina, Bob, and I would work with any information we needed to gather from a statistical or data or informational piece from students.
Do you see those forums maybe happening at just for ease of doing it, at the SAU governing board level, or would they be separate forums that would be?
I'd use the example, they'd be kind of like what we did for H-STEP. They'd be publicly posted, and because this is affecting all our districts, we would just have multiple nights, and whatever worked for a person's schedule. And we would use large venues like either, the high school gym, the auditorium, so that we wouldn't have to worry about social distancing of those type of things. We may decide to do one on Zoom, depending on how the COVID continues.
Okay.
And the committee, is it made up of, are there staff on these on the committee as well?
There will be. My advisory committee is going to be more like a small group, similar to what we did for the reopening plan. And then, just like we did for reopening, we will get staff input and on the areas of curriculum that as we move forward. But the advisory committee will be kind of more of, steering the rudder. Where are we heading and where we want? But our teachers will be involved. And that's the balancing act for me, because it's kind of a unique year with a lot on their plate already. So I need to balance how much we ask of our teachers with I think the level of attention that this issue needs.
Any other questions?
And it doesn't actually rule out hiring consultants in spot circumstances. A curriculum piece that's really specific or technical, a presentation for professional development that's district-wide, et cetera, not 24,000, but...
Right. And the advisory committee could make that recommendation. They might come back with, for the gathering of data or some sort of technical survey that we might want to administer. But at least then it would be a set cost for a set period of time, and the community could make their decision based on whether they felt that was critical to the mission of this
sort
topic.
of surgical approach,
Yep.
yeah.
I have one more question about the formation of the committee. I feel like I recollect some other committees that have been formed over time, similar to this, in which it's been posted publicly that, would you like to serve on this committee sort of thing? Or is this more that you have connections with people that you're recruiting for
I would
these
say
positions?
this is a little more recruiting, but word has got out, and I've had some people email me that I don't have a past or a history with, and I'm going to be talking to folks on Thursday via phone to get their input. But I am absolutely going to get some of the people who helped to write the resolution, as well as some of the people who have spoken up at some of the meetings, just so we have a diverse representation. And then I believe it was already 3 that I've received, and I'm sure I'll receive a couple more from tonight's discussion around the topic.
Wonderful, thank you. So people can reach out is the point if they're interested.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, very good. Thank
And
you.
even if they're not on the advisory, there will absolutely be a
Have their
role,
voices
because
heard.
this is a big project.
Very good, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, let's move forward. Anything else, Andy?
Nope, that's it for me.
Okay. So do we have anticipating any public input this evening from anyone? Okay, I'm happy to, by all means.
Okay.
We'll open the floor to public input. All the standard rules apply. Just your name
Can
and...
I keep my mask on?
You can leave your mask on, absolutely.
Susan Carlin Giles, 44 Forest View Drive, Hollis. I know you guys always put in countless hours, but I can't thank you enough for the countless hours you've put in. Everybody had a different summer, but I can only imagine what your guys' summer was like. So thank you for making the building as safe for us teachers and as safe for the little students as you possibly can. So that's all. I don't want to tear up. Do I need to
Thank you.
wipe anything down?
I don't, I'll defer to Bob on that.
Bob, do you want her to wipe
Do we
down the
need to
microphone?
wipe anything down?
Did you touch
Yes.
anything?
Could you wipe it down, please?
We'll just set a good example for, right?
Just keep that on camera, please, so you can see the
Good
good
example.
example of cleaning.
All right, and if we have a large influx of the public, we could always come back and address that if necessary.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Moving on to our discussion, memorandum of understanding with our professional staff union.
Over the last few months, we have been working with our unions across the SAU to arrive at what we call a memorandum of agreement. Basically, the document that I presented to you earlier tonight goes through all the all the health and safety guidelines that the board has been aware of that were incorporated into our plan. It talks about the physical distancing. It talks about PPE, cleaning products, all of those pieces, and teachers are receiving trainings around that during these days of professional development as we open the year. The MOA also talks about how we'll evaluate teachers if we're in remote learning, what type of observation procedures, and we'll be putting a committee together, and we'll be addressing that. It also talks about, our expectations for staff and what staff can expect from us. It is kind of what I'd say a fluid document, because parts of it are based on the CDC and Department of Health and Human Services. And as we all know, those recommendations can change, and some have changed already. And the teachers' unions are aware of that, and obviously understand that we'd have a conversation around any significant changes. We have been preparing with our nurses, because the nurses will be the conduit to assist parents with understanding of symptoms and giving guidance. They're not making a diagnosis. If a student had symptoms, our nurse would be contacting the family and outlining what they would recommend, including potentially going to your pediatrician and things of that nature. If we were to have a student who we suspect or was confirmed with COVID, the nurse would reach out to the Department of Health and Human Services. This is something we do now for other pieces, like when we have the whooping cough is the example I usually use, because we're mandated to contact them. And the nurse would work with the Department of Health and Human Services to identify what's going on in our building, and they would work together with the nurse, the school administration, and the SAU administration for what steps would take place next. I believe this has been a fairly negotiated document. It addresses items where a student or a teacher to need to be quarantined and how that would be addressed by the administration and the teachers union and the SAU. And I'd be happy to answer any questions the board may have on the MOA that we discussed earlier.
Andy, I have a real concern outside of the proper information we discussed in non-meeting around the nurses being responsible, as you called it, for, I've already lost the word you used, but guiding families as to the nurses' sense that a student may have COVID. Are families required to take any action should one of our nurses make that designation?
No, and I don't want to give the wrong impression. It's no different than if the nurse called a parent today, and I'll say if we were in a non-COVID world. They would discuss the symptoms of the student, and they would probably make a recommendation maybe to go see their pediatrician or what to do. So the nurse is not diagnosing a student. They're having a conversation with the family, and in many cases, they already have a pre-existing relationships with many of our families and have that comfort level, and may guide them saying, it's seasonal allergy season. And every year your child since kindergarten has had this seasonal allergy. So it's most likely the seasonal allergy, but you might want to just give your pediatrician a call. Some families are already being proactive in reaching out to their doctors and saying the child has seasonal allergies. It's not uncommon for them to have a runny nose, but that's still going to be a conversation with the nurse.
Right, so this is, I'm trying to keep my comments and questions within the context of the memo of understanding, as opposed to a discussion we should have about the practical daily, matters around these things. I'm just, within the MOU, the nurse doesn't have diagnosing powers the way a physician does. I've got vast experience with this through my children, so I appreciate that limitation. Within this agreement, the nurse is obligated, right? The nurses are obligated to make these assessments like they would be for any other student coming in with any concerns. Are the nurses within this agreement, I'm having a hard time formulating my question because this is also new. Are they the person that determines a child it must be quarantined?
No. The nurse is simply the point person that will start that discussion.
Right.
As they are with, and have been for many, many years.
Right.
And the nurse, the reason they're being the point person is because when they called Department of Health and Human Services, they have the medical background to talk to the nurse there.
Of course.
I have called DHHS before when I was first here, and I made the determination at that point it would be better for the nurse to call.
Of course.
Because there's a skill set required to talk about these issues.
Of course, and we have terrific nurses. But
Right.
my question to you then is, within that memo of understanding the nurse, I understand what you said. I've experienced it directly with other symptom sets that have nothing to do with COVID, and we have tremendous professionals in our 2 offices in our buildings. So I'm just curious, what is then the protocol if a nurse says, you've lost your sense of smell, you've got a fever, you're coughing, I've called mom, and I've told mom, I think this is potentially a case of COVID. Who makes the call that student has to go home? A fever, obviously, they have to go home, but...
Well, it's no different than any day of the week pre-COVID. If the nurse feels that you are sick and ill, she is going to call mom and dad, and they're going to come and get you. There'll be a conversation with mom and dad regarding what the nurse would recommend for next steps.
So this memo doesn't change any of that. It doesn't give the nurse different powers or take power from the nurse that we've all experienced with them before.
No, I think it just, in the memo, it just talks about the nurse being the point person to contact DHHS because of their level of expertise.
Great, thank you.
I would say, based on our conversations and our review of the memo of understanding, or agreement in this case, I'm fairly comfortable that it's maintaining our management rights as part of our regular CBA. Could you speak a little bit about the period at which this memorandum of agreement is in force for?
This document was developed for the 2020-2021 school year. So this is basically a document to address the health and safety items around COVID-19 and issues that may impact our teaching staff. It was done through Attorney Clausen, who has negotiated our contracts in the Holllis district for many, many years. He did an outstanding job working with all our unions, and the document itself, after it goes to the co-op board on Thursday night, will become a public document and posted on our website for anybody who might like to look at that.
Okay. Any other questions relating to the document? Okay, seeing none, I'd like to move on to registration date update.
So at this time, we have determined class sizes, and in kindergarten, this time, we will have 3 in-person classes and 1 remote section. In first grade, we will have 3 in-person sections and 2 remote sections. In second grade, we will have 4 in-person sections and 1 remote section, and that remote section will have an instructional assistant with it. In grade 3, we will have 3 in-person sections and 2 remote sections. In grade 4, we will have 3 in-person sections with 1 remote section. In 5, we will have 4 in-person sections with 1 remote section that will have an instructional assistant. And in grade 6, we will have 4 in-person sections and 2 remote sections. At this time, our in-person sections are nearly maxed out, so we are asking all families that if there's a desire to change, now is not the time. We're asking them to commit to their original request and go from there. Our first natural break is a long weekend in October 9th. We're going to use that as a date to reevaluate where we are. If we need to make adjustments with sections of students who are in person or in remote, that might be an opportunity to make a change to the current registration status of in person or remote.
So I think the thing we all have to think about, all of us in the community, whether we're in the schools or not, is that the in-person sections are dictated by the social distancing, the physical distancing guidelines established by state and federal agencies. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So we only have so many square feet in any given building, in any given classroom, and there's a maximum number of bodies that can be in any given state. I wrestle with this because it's so difficult to fit all the different paradigms, all the different mandates. So once, what you're saying is currently we have people who've signed up for remote learning, people who've signed up for in the building, and this balance is how you've come up with the class distributions you just went through. Is that correct, Gina?
That is correct. And, some parents have made changes to their registration status in the last couple of weeks, and at this point, we need to just sit tight and hold on to these as the class lists are going out tomorrow. Well, not the lists, but the teacher assignments. And so in order to do the teacher assignments, we need to put a pause and sort of freeze our registration so that students can meet their teacher and teachers can meet their students.
Gina, how many students are we still missing registration or response from at this point?
I'm not going to identify the number, it's very small. So we are in pretty good shape. The only question mark would be those who have just moved to our community and have not registered yet. That
Great,
might
thank you.
fluctuate. Yep.
I have a question about the request for switching.
Yes.
At this point, if people are thinking they're wanting to and we're asking them to hold off, would you want to be aware of those so that those numbers are being tracked before October 9th? Or is there going to be a time that we say, okay, we want to know who's thinking of switching now?
Absolutely. I would communicate your desire to make a change so that we can hang on to the names and the numbers and make an educated decision of how to move forward from that point.
Okay.
Are we still compliant with our in-classroom class size policies? Or are we asking, is the administration asking for some sort of waiver?
We are more than complying with our in-person class size. As I mentioned, grade 2 and grade 5, currently the remote sections have an instructional assistant that will be assigned to them. So those remote sections are larger than the desire of the board based on the policy. And we brought that up in our last board meeting to talk about potential staffing needs.
Yes.
And that's something that we're keeping an eye on, which would also dictate potentially splitting those up if we have too many more additions to that remote section. Certainly one barrier is the lack of certified teachers nationwide. So it's trying to balance the availability of staffing with what we have and what we would like to provide.
Our policy was always written from a standpoint of in-person class sizes. So I believe I'm not sure if I think the policy is silent on things like remote learning, or if it can be extended to remote learning. I think that's a completely different conversation that I'm not sure we are going to get too deep into. We do have a agenda adjustment to speak about the remote classes section specifically, but I just wanted to establish that our in-class numbers, we are still within our
Absolutely.
And how about in terms of social distancing requirements? How are we in person?
We are maintaining the 6 feet of separation.
And do we have room?
The only time we would
Legal
not
room.
maintain the 6 feet of social distancing is if there was a student or small group of students who are working in a pull-out setting, where it's more of an intimate teaching setting, and there's plexiglass in there. So you might be closer, but there is a plexiglass barrier to provide that additional.
With our
Safety
current
precautions.
numbers, I guess my question was like, do we have, coming up against that October 9th, ebb and flow, do we have social distancing space? Do we have space for space to add more students in?
At this time, we don't really have a lot of space in our in-person sections, which is why one of the reasons why we're saying, let's just sit tight for now and see what happens.
So-
There might be the opportunity for an entire remote section to return to the building if there's the desire and the ability. There are a lot of factors. There might be an in-person student who wants to switch to remote. So the one thing about this pandemic is that you're constantly planning for the unknown and what is, not really predictable. And so we're just going to gather as much information as we can every day to try to move forward in a way that makes sense. We do have additional classroom spaces that we could use if we needed to add an additional section
that's good to know.
in-person.
Gina, we have a stage in this space, we have gym, we have some spaces in, when the mold hit the sixth grade in 1902, was it 2010? 2009, I guess. The whole sixth grade was distributed throughout the rest of this building, mostly in the gym. They used to call it Sixth Grade Nation because that was funny back then. So is there that kind of consideration being planned for? Is that one of the planning for the unknowns that you're doing? If enough people really urgently want to return to the building and the staffing could be flexed back to that, do we have a thought to that kind of?
So we have really considered just about every possibility that you can imagine. I don't envision us utilizing the gym or the cafeteria for classroom spaces because we do have vacant classrooms. So that would be the top priority, to utilize those spaces.
Good. That's here. I don't know about the primary school. I know it's a smaller building,
So some, at this time, we are going to be opening more windows. As we hit a colder season, we're not going to be opening as many windows. So the, availability of windows becomes less of an issue. In addition to as some filters become available as they're on back order. So there's a lot of different factors that we are considering with every smallest detail of a decision.
So about these remote learning classes, last time we met here, you gave this report, and I've squawked about the remote learning class sizes that you were considering having to address. You were looking at the registrations, and you talked about it a little bit today. I was very unhappy with the size of the remote learning classes in any of the grades that were well past our ed spec. And I don't know, because you didn't say numbers, which is fine. I think we're going to discuss that shortly. But currently, can you say what numbers are in the current plan for remote learning classes in terms of the numbers of kids that are currently intended to be in them? And at our last meeting, we talked about empowering the administration to look at hiring additional hands if they can be found. I understand that there's a sudden hiring shortfall for educators, but to the degree that people could be attracted to it, did you have to utilize, or did you choose to utilize additional hands to split down some of those larger remote learning courses that you talked about last meeting?
Yes, so I tried to give a little bit of the insight when I shared the number of in-person and remote sections. Don't hold me to it.
No, it changes every day, I'm sure.
It will change every day, and I am trying to read off of sections without having teachers assigned to them in Power School, so I'm doing my best. But we're looking at in kindergarten about 16 students in the remote learning section. In grade 1, we're looking at a couple sections of 14. In grade 2, we have 25. So that is why we have an instructional assistant assigned to that class as well. In grade 3, we have 2 sections of 14. Grade 4, we're at a section of 22. So that's well within the board policy. In grade 5, we're at 28, which is certainly above board policy, but we do have the instructional assistant there. And then in grade 6, we have an 18 and a 19. So overall, I think we're in pretty good shape. We have a couple of sections that are a little bit larger, but we do have the assistant. I know that in second grade, Mrs. Isbicki spoke with a teacher who is assigned the remote section, and that teacher felt very confident in her ability to do a great job with 25
encouraging,
students.
thank you.
And
The question I also
preferred
have
it that
about
way than
this-
to
oh, I'm
split it
sorry.
up.
So hard to see you. I'm so sorry to step on you. Every time you bring up the instructional assistant, I remember, and then when it's my turn to talk, I forget. Without referring to students or identifying students, is it, I know that there are a number of kids who have IEPs who have parents assigned to them. So is it possible, in an in-person classroom, an IEP para just happens to spill over to the other kids because and helps, generally with the classroom, even though that's not their specific assignment. Do you foresee that potential for the remote learning classrooms as well?
I would say I don't think you can count on that because the number of educators in our buildings are tied to services listed in IEP. There is an occasion where a paraeducator does work with students in regular ed, but to make that any type of general rule to support remote learning, it wouldn't be sustainable.
Got it.
Gina, are these classroom assistants listed here, or have they already been hired, or are these the ones that we're currently seeking to add to the classrooms? Or maybe you don't know, sorry.
I can tell you what I received from the principals. Let's see. With an instructional para.
So that-
My understanding is that they're difficult to find right now just based on hiring across the district. But it's a little bit of a whirlwind because between all of our schools, there's a lot of hiring going on. So I don't have confirmation.
Okay.
But if anyone's looking to become an instructional assistant, we certainly have positions available across the SAU.
Great pitch.
It was interesting, Andy informed us that there are dozens of positions open and can't be filled in some of the surrounding school districts, and you're not just making this up, that hiring is becoming difficult. So I appreciate that problem.
Any other discussion or questions related to registration? If not, I'd like to move on to our item that we adjusted the agenda with. I'll prime the discussion a little bit. There has been some inquiry about the size of the remote classes that we have and how it relates to, what challenges that presents to overall instruction and experience for the students. And I think I'm looking for input from this board on, is there an appetite for setting certain limits so we can give some sort of input to the administration in terms of where we might want to put limits on remote sections, and when or if it triggers action, or just maybe just to be able to build some budgeting aspects as we move into our budget building process.
Well, Rob, wouldn't that be one of two paths, either policy or sense of the board? I mean,
Right now, just looking for a sense of the board, so the administration just has an idea of what they can expect. I'm not against doing an action, but I think that may be a little premature tonight. But I think a sense of the board would be useful. I'll defer to the superintendent on that, on the guidance.
Obviously, if the school board would like to see numbers reduced for remote sections, we would do our best to support that via hiring. We may look at something a little flexible because we have two sections that are larger than we may like. We may, because of the hiring shortage, be able to look for one person who's K-6 certified, and they could spend half the morning in the room with the second grade teacher and then half the day in the afternoon with the fifth grade teacher, and that would give you two certified professionals in the room, which would greatly reduce the numbers. We're not opposed to that by any means. We think the instructional para and the person at grade 2 will do an exceptional job. The concern would be if things trended in our favor, when would we return to the classroom? Who would return? Would we be, would those people be maintained for the entire year?
Right.
You know, from a budget standpoint, it's not going to be an easy budget year by any stretch of the imagination, because you're spending money on PPE, plexiglass, the different things. At the same time, in Hollис, we have the contingency fund, which we haven't touched yet, which we have used other years. We also have the unreserved fund balance, which we voted on just a meeting or two ago. That obviously would need budget committee approval and school board approval to go into those funds, and that would be kind of a last resort. The other piece that is still somewhat unknown, there are most likely some new costs associated with special education, so we have to be concerned about those budget items. We do have a limited special education trust fund that could assist with that, but as we come back to school, we'll be doing meetings and things that will dictate if there are any services that we owe families, and obviously those services would come with cost too. So I do have a budget concern, just because, again, things change, but at the same time, if the board were to, vote and authorize for us to look at all means and mechanisms to reduce that, we would be happy to do that, knowing full well there might not be a body out there, and that there would be a significant possibility that we may be starting the year with the numbers we're talking about tonight.
So it may be more aspirational than any kind of limits that we can guarantee that we're going to address at any one time.
Correct. And again, each time you advertise, you don't know what's going to come in for resumes, because people are not always looking the same times, and the pool we have right now that we're looking at may not be the same pool we have in 2 weeks.
Andy, question about triggers to, the thing is, numbers aren't, we don't know how the remote learning is going to be, how effective it'll be this fall compared to how it was in the spring, because you've restructured it. You've had the benefit of learning from how it went in the spring, and the staff is, obviously changing their approach in order to make it as effective as possible. So I'm curious about if we were to not take an action, if we were to not put either a policy or some other mechanism forward for a enrollment limit per remote learning section, is there some other trigger, like an academic outcome? We're not using assessments, we're not using NEWAs, et cetera. Is there some other academic or social emotional learning need that would trigger a sense of urgency or reprioritize that? Does my question make any sense? Am I getting it?
Yeah, I would not recommend a policy. I would potentially recommend, or the board could consider authorizing the school administration to hire if they felt that the need was justified. And I think the concern is around the sizes of those classes, and there's nothing wrong with us doing an anticipated opening, so we're already starting the process. Then we start the year and see how things are going with the teacher and a paraprofessional, and see what resumes came in the door, and could report back to the board probably later this month as far as that progress goes.
I have a question about the comparison of numbers and, the importance of putting a pause on the mobility. Because what just played through my head is that, is it the case that because in the 2nd grade and the 5th grade that the remote is at 25 and 28, I didn't get the numbers for because we didn't say them. Does that mean that the in-school in those sections are smaller? Or, I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but it just makes me wonder, that also is a solution, right? Is if there was mobility if parents were now saying, oh, I didn't realize my child was going to be with 28 other kids, that would have been a factor for me. I would really prefer them to be in school in a smaller group. Because honestly, as a parent, that's like sort of what all went through my head is, well, I want him in school if he's going to be safe and socially distanced, but if it's going to be all the kids are in school, do you see what I'm getting at?
Yes.
I'm not saying it well, but I'm like, why would we not let people come back in those grades if it's going to make our numbers better? But I understand why we have to pause. So
Well, I think there's a couple pieces to it, and I think it's a very valid point. First, the first pause is to get all children identified with a teacher, which goes out tomorrow.
yeah.
And I think that's
tomorrow,
a huge piece. Once that goes out, like we've already received, we've had some families rethink whether it be to be in person or to be remote. And the principals have asked that those parents pause, not saying that we won't do it, but would like to get the teachers' names out, who's doing what, and gather that information. In our in-person sections, really the driving force has been around the 6 foot of social distancing.
Right.
There are some rooms that have rooms. Have room, meaning we could accommodate students if parents were to make that request. Most of our parents made the decision based on their comfort level around COVID-19, and there's been just a few, but not a monumental number that would make me think a lot of parents are going to shift their choice, at least not to start school. October 9th may be a different decision because we'll have a month's worth of data. With regards to the remote sections being larger, that was just based on parental choice. And then we looked at the teachers for those sections, who the para would be for those sections. And as I said, we're not opposed if the board directs us to see if we could reduce those sections to doing that. But we do feel that we could open up the school year and be very effective as of today.
So you mentioned the 2 paras at the grade 2 and grade 5. Are those folks already on staff, or are those the 2 positions that the board authorized at our last meeting for you to hire?
Those were the positions that you authorized us to hire. Well, we discussed a possible teacher or an instructional assistant, depending on how those final registrations came in.
Yep, no, I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, so those are additional staff members.
Okay. And I know that, we talked about the MOA at the beginning of this conversation, and some of the questions that a lot of parents have had that they've reached out to us, or we've seen the talk on social media is what happens when they've got an in-person student that has to flex into remote because of a quarantine situation or other sort of illness or something. For me, that plays deeply into these remote class situations. I think it would be helpful for our parents to hear you guys walk through what we've heard a little bit about, what that looks like, and then what that means for those remote sections. And I think that'll also help guide how we feel about the remote section limits that we may or may not want to guide on where that's concerned.
Sure.
Thank
so
you.
For students who need to quarantine for a 2-week period, now if the student is ill for any reason and unable to participate in learning, the same old rules apply. They call in sick, and when they're well enough to return, they return. But if there's a quarantine that's required and the students are well and can participate in learning, and we're talking about a 2-week quarantine, a 14-day quarantine, those students who are registered as in-person students cannot return in person. So what they will do is add on and participate in the remote teachers' Zoom direct instruction sessions for math, ELA, morning meetings, science, social studies, specials, etc. The student will stay on their in-person teacher's roster, and they will complete all their assignments for their regular teacher that they've always had. They will also have the opportunity, if the parent is interested, in having up to 3 20-minute one-on-one Zoom sessions with that teacher throughout each of the weeks, that they're quarantined, to just, solidify their understanding from what they observed with the remote teaching instruction and what they knew to be true, with their own teacher's way of explaining things, or just to do this final check-in and are we good with this, or I noticed you submitted this assignment and let's just talk about this more. So they'll have that opportunity to connect with their classroom teacher, but they'll also have the opportunity to participate in that direct instruction in those core content areas.
Thank you for outlining that, Gina.
And I also just want to mention that if there's obviously a significant number of students quarantined, there's a larger discussion whether we should be in person or not in person.
Right.
So I don't want to think that there's going to be this huge number of kids being quarantined.
Right.
Because if there is, then the decision has to be made by the administration about going to fully remote. And if a classroom was asked to quarantine, so let's say a third grade classroom, for whatever reason, the recommendation is for that cohort to quarantine for the 14 days, that teacher would also be providing the instruction fully remotely. So I don't envision a lot of kids accessing this piece. It's just, I'll say, a safety net, because once we get it into over 10 days, then we have a legal obligation to provide services.
Right. I'm not too worried about the classrooms that have the smaller number. I'm happy to see the changes being made at the first and third grade level, because those are pretty large. We talked about that prior. I'm just thinking at like grade 5, you get 2 kids who quarantine, now you have 30 students participating in a remote session. So it gets to feel like a lot as someone who works on Zoom every day with large numbers of people. It's a lot, even with adults. So I just want to be completely mindful of that and make sure that we're providing that equitable education experience to every student, no matter the modality that they're participating in.
The other piece the board could look at is doing something where you give us permission to hire and we create what I'll call a flexible position. So they're assisted with remote learning. If kids are quarantined, maybe they become somebody that works with those particular kids. So again, we're not opposed to the staffing request if that's what the board sees fit.
Yeah.
I'm just putting the caution out that we don't know where our numbers are going to settle right now.
Right.
So tonight you may want to make a motion and just give us the flexibility if we see fit to hire. And then we would come back if we had to make that move and then kind of work with the board to tell you where the funding was going to come from and those components.
So I'm looking for maybe what is most helpful for the administration. So does it suffice if we continue to monitor it and as we move into the school year? And we've had to do this before as a board, where we're getting updates of where we're at, what kind of students are moving into a remote because of quarantining or other reasons versus others who don't, and what those numbers are. And then maybe that triggers an action, or would you prefer having us give you that flexibility for that flex resource?
You could choose either model. My worry would be there are still a number of homes that are up for sale, and part of the reason that some folks are selecting us is because we are open in person. We are telling people right now that if they were to sign up, they would be remote, which could, to Carol's point, increase that number. Mm-hmm. So I think knowing that could happen between what is September 2nd, we open the 9th, would probably be looking for a board meeting the end of the month. So you'd probably be looking at like 2 weeks to let the dust settle. So it's just the board's comfort level. If you would like to wait, and the response to families that would have concerns is the board would be meeting on this date, we'll be discussing adding a teacher, or the opposite piece would be the board has authorized us to hire a teacher, we're in that process to make that happen.
Well, why don't we proceed by just like a round table here from each member. So options before you would be, do we wait for that later on, the September update, later in this month, before we take an action, or do we want to give certain latitude for hiring now?
I think it would
understand
be
if the-
incredibly imprudent not to give the administration the tools to respond nimbly, as the DOE likes to say, to contingencies that arise. Some schools, it's been COVID boring, and some schools, it has been hell for leather across the country, and I think Andy and the building administrators should have all the tools they need to ensure that, as Carol so eloquently said, educational equity is optimized as much as we humanly can do it. I do want to ask, just as a technical footnote, that if we make a motion, are we required to include any kind of up to language with respect to funds?
No, I would just make the motion that it would be coming out of the operating budget, and it would be Kelly, Gina, Bob, and I that would decide where.
Just for my clarification for where we currently stand, do we have staffing to cover all the sections that have been created? Not necessarily, I know that the assistants we're seeking, but in terms of those divided sections remotely?
We have teachers to cover the sections. We have some long-term substitute positions available to cover some short-term leaves, if anyone's interested.
Okay, so some of these sections will be starting with a long-term sub, is that?
Correct.
Okay.
Carol?
No, I mean, my concerns kind of stand with the flexing of the remotes. I really, really, really hope we can find the assistants to make the second and fifth grade experiences for those remote students the best it can be. So I just kind of want to log that. I'm confident in what you guys have done throughout this whole process as an SAU staff and as, just everybody at the different schools. If the teachers that have been assigned to these remote sections are feeling confident in their abilities to manage the class sizes in those, specifically those two remote sections of second and fifth grade, without the paras or assistants that we are hoping to get, then I feel okay with that. I would like to check in with it. I don't know that I want to put a policy on there right now or any sort of limitation. I do kind of echo what Tammy said. I want you guys to be able to respond when you can, how you can. We trust you with that. You've done a good job with that so far. So, that's kind of my sense for it. But I'm happy with the breaks that have been made with the different sections.
Okay.
Thanks.
Brooke?
I would want us to be striving for the same standards, class sizes that we set for in-person. I understand that may not be feasible, but that's what I would want to empower our administration to do.
Well, in that case, can we just make a motion and have the discussion in the context of
Let's
the
go around the
motion?
room here first.
Oh, I'm sorry, Amy, I
Yeah.
beg your pardon.
Amy?
Yeah, I would support authorizing administration for hires, flexible hires. Yep.
Okay. I think for me, I think where I sit on this is I'd like to see another data point and be updated. I'm kind of on the fence. I could support it now, but I think it's probably more prudent. I really think we're going to be meeting in literally 2 weeks from now, and probably sooner if we need to, based on how things change. So I think for me, I would like to see that additional data point and do a how are we doing, and move maybe such an action to new business for the next time we meet, or potentially to take an action.
Mr. Chair, wait, did you
Yep.
just say that we're going to meet in 2 weeks? I thought
No,
Andrew was saying it.
No.
Soon enough.
It's potentially, we're going to have to set up when that is, but it's not going to be a month from now. It's
But
going to
that's
be
what Andy
within-
had said in his comment, it'd be the end of September, so that's why I was thinking, I beg your pardon, it just seems like the end of September is...
Well, I'm thinking if things are changing and we're seeing events that would cause us to need to meet sooner, we're going to do that.
Okay. All right.
So
That's fine with me.
I just,
Meeting
for
sooner is
me,
fine with me, I just wondered
I
if
guess
there was
where I
a-
stand is this, I think we put a very good memorandum of understanding together. I think we have a very good, solid reopening plan. I think we have a lot of latitude for the administration to act and move as they need to. As I said, I'm not, if remote sections are getting up into the 30, that's getting high for me too, and I would want to have a deep discussion on what is the prolonged time period at that level. Are we seeing a rise of that happening, or is this just a blip? I need a little bit more
And how it's affecting the
information.
students who are in the classroom. That's
Right.
kind of what I was saying with
And
the
just
check-in
how
and
we
how
do
it's
it
going.
remotely in general. I think
How do we measure that?
That's why I asked about what the triggering experience would be. That's what I meant to say, is
Yeah.
how do you
And
determine that?
I think the trigger itself is going to be, could be potentially a long discussion and debate of what that trigger should be. So I'd rather avoid that at this point and get input from our administrators as to how are we doing, and do we feel that we need to put something together at that point?
Just so the board knows, we open the 9th, so that means between the 9th and the 30th, which is the final Wednesday of the month, is 15 school days. So if we wanted to, we could schedule the 30th tonight and get that on our calendars, and then we would have that 15 days to talk to those 2 remote teachers to see how they're doing. We can see where the dust is settled for numbers, and then we can come back and make a recommendation. And I think from a parent standpoint, if I know that something's taking place the 30th, then I don't feel, like it's a definite date there.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that.
Everyone's good with that?
Well, I guess it's pretty...
Yep, that's good.
sorry.
Okay, why don't we proceed that way, and... and
Tammy wanted to say
No,
something.
no, Amy
Yeah.
sounds like Tammy. I thought he was talking to me. I'm sorry.
So we'll begin the agenda process for September 30?
Yep.
For a meeting then?
Yep.
With updates on remote, just a remote class update and how things are going, and we can
Yep.
go from there.
And does that date work for the board? We'll just have it,
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
okay, thank you. So we'll plan on that. I'll get something out to Rob, and we'll do an agenda, and then I'll get a draft agenda out so people can know the topics.
Thanks, Andy.
Okay. Moving on to our deliberations to see what action the board will take regarding the MOU with the unions.
Rob, before we do that,
Yep.
I need to ask you a question. I
Yep.
would like to discuss a aspect of the reopening plan
Okay?
that I feel ardently about. I'm happy to do it as a new business after all the rest of the agenda is taken care of, or we can just keep it in
Yeah, we
discussion.
prefer that because
Okay,
it's
let's do
really
that
not
then.
on our agenda, and I'd
Great.
look to the rest of the board if they want to delve into that.
Okay, I can always do it as a public comment.
Okay, so let's handle the deliberation section, so I'll take a motion.
Okay, let's do our motions. Where are we?
Motion to approve the memorandum of understanding as presented.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion.
Thanks to the group that was working on it.
Yeah, indeed, this was a lot of conversation over several months, I would say. Yeah, great work here. And hats off to Tom as well.
Sure.
Okay, seeing no other discussion, all in favor of the motion by roll call? Tammy?
Tammy, aye.
Carol Roy, aye.
Brooke, aye.
Amy?
Amy, aye.
And Rob, aye. Do we have a non-public scheduled for this evening?
We do not.
All right, there was a discussion to touch on an aspect of the reopening plan, not on the agenda, so I'm looking for somebody to
I
sponsor that.
wanted to ask about
Yep,
the mask. I want to understand the mask issue better because I think it's important for the entire community, not even just our kids and teachers and families, but even those who just live in the community, to understand where the designations are. I am wicked concerned about the definition of mask break. I want to understand, and I asked about this before, if I'm a ghost, I can come through the wall and I might see 17 children sitting in the classroom, physically distanced per all the guidelines, with their masks off for a considerable period. And I'd like to understand, what is the definition of a break? Is it 1 minute? Is it an entire class period? And how does a teacher or whatever adult has been designated the authority in that situation have the technical skills to determine how long a period is safe and who is safe in that situation?
In terms of the mask piece, the concept basically is we are wearing masks, first and foremost. They'll be worn on the bus, in the hallways. If I get up to go to the bathroom, and that means I'm moving through that 6 feet of students, masks are on. What we are providing is an opportunity for professional staff or staff members to provide short breaks. I don't envision classes not having masks on like you just described. I envision those type of breaks taking outside in the tents that we had installed.
Yeah, I saw those. Those look good.
Yep. And again, I'd be happy to report back on the 30th how masks are going, because it's a learning curve. We're talking young children, but I will say some of the younger children have picked it up much quicker than some of the adults.
Yes.
I still catch myself having to go back into my office to get my mask. I basically have done the strategy. I have one pretty much everywhere now,
Right.
so I can always reach one. But I've been around some of our preschool students and other young students, and I have been so impressed by their knowledge and what their parents have done to get them prepared. So I'd be happy to give an update on the 30th as well and put that on the agenda, because again, I think just talking, I don't exactly know what everything looks like because it's all brand new to us. But I do want the community to understand that we now know that masks make a difference. A face covering makes a difference. Our goal is to be in school for as long as we possibly can. June would be ideal. To get there, all of us as community members are going to have to continue our due diligence, so that's going to include the adults and the students in schools. It's going to include all our sports team. Everybody's going to have to really work together to make this happen. Couple pieces of data that I'd like to bring back, how are younger learners doing it? Is it something that we're teaching, because we're going to talk about putting masks on and off? The type of mask that Brooke happens to have on, oftentimes you'll see it break around the ear. So we have plenty of masks for students who maybe their mask breaks during the day. I can see students going out to recess and losing a mask, or dropping it on the ground and really not being appropriate to put on for the rest of the day. So there's a lot of data we want to gather, but I think, from the standpoint of we know masks are an effective tool versus COVID, we are going to start very rigid, so I'm not sure how many mask breaks you'll see as we open the year. I think all of our staff and students will grow at a comfort level, and those breaks will kind of become built into the schedule, just like we see with a lot of different aspects of school.
Andy, I think to kind of piggyback on that, there's been the conversation about what is a face mask or a face covering, and it seems that definition did not carry over, because that could have an impact on, the comfortability for a student to be covered. You know what I'm saying? So is there somewhere we can have that full allowed definition of face covering publicized? I know there are a lot of questions.
We can happily do that. What we're looking for is a student to show up with the face covering. Now, there have been things that have come out recently that say one is not as good as another. Anything is better than nothing. So if you, as a parent, have already determined what your face mask is, please don't be sitting there panicked. Send them to school. We will take care of them. We will contact you if there's a concern. You know, just like, I mean, think of what it was like just to bring that kindergartner for the first day of school as a parent. Very, very difficult. Now I'm bringing my kindergartner in the midst of a pandemic. Our first priority is that child. And we'll take care of them. We'll help them with their mask. We'll communicate anything we need to communicate with the parents as appropriate. But I think we're ready to go, and I can honestly say it's been very exciting to be in our buildings. It's great to have our staff back. They are ready to go. They are learning just like I am learning that all of this is new.
Yes, very.
Andy?
Yep.
I heard you mention that it's going to be very rigid at the beginning, and I understand where Tammy was coming from because I understand the importance of wearing masks. I also need to express my concern. I haven't worn a mask for 5 hours straight yet. I rejoice when I get to take it off. None of my kids have worn a mask for more probably than an hour straight at a time. And I have a feeling that there's going to be many kids coming into the buildings that some may be wearing them for the first time.
Right.
So how do we reconcile that, I guess?
Well, to me, it's no different. As a former teacher, I'm going to gauge my class. And I might ask the question, how many people need a mask break? And if I see 15 hands go up and I have the proper social distancing, or I might decide, hey, we're going to go outside to the field for 10 minutes. And we're not going to hang together, we're going to all space out, there's chairs out there. You know, that's where I think, I know parents are concerned, but we do this with fire drills, we do this with intruder drills. There are so many things that we teach every day that are difficult. We will make it happen with the mask. We're going to teach kids how to walk 6 feet apart. It'll take some time. It'll be just like the child who goes flying past me and didn't get their hand sanitizer because recess is more important. All of those things, they're going to be kids.
So Andy, the questions that we're asking, I want to iterate because I always forget to say these things. I am not coming myself, just speaking for myself, I'm not coming from a place of mistrust. I'm coming from a place of desiring to articulate in our public setting here and for the record, so that you know how you articulated it was terrific, and I feel answered my concern 95%. You said one thing, and I saw in Principal Fowler's FAQ another thing that you mentioned the inevitable popcorn of masks. Some are going to break, some are going to drop, some are going to fall, some are going to get slingshotted. It's inevitable. They're kids, right? So are students taking their masks out with them at recess and mask breaks? I assume so because they have to wear them inside the building, right?
Well, they have to walk through all of the recess.
And again, I'll just give an example that I know. One of our schools is using what I'll call the solo cups. Mm-hmm. So you go out for recess, and that's where your mask goes, and you come back and you take your mask out of your solo cup. Okay? You can use plastic bags. There are a whole different things.
5-gallon buckets that Mrs. Fowler.
Some parents are going to clip them onto the lanyards.
Okay.
There are a whole bunch. But at the same time, having raised 3 sons, I could see my boys losing their mask every recess.
Yeah.
Yes. You know, it's probably just in their pocket. They just don't know enough to look in their pocket.
Right.
So we will have plenty of alternatives. We will be prepared. And again, the other thing is I don't want a child to be scared because I don't have my mask for a second.
Of course not.
And at least it's not their retainer.
Correct. Yes. And for families who don't know, we have done many a trash barrel out.
You helped me calm down several years ago
Yep.
when she was we were both losing our mind over a lost
Yep.
retainer, so.
Yep.
That's amazing.
So to that same point, reading over Mrs. Fowler's FAQ that went out with the schedules, She mentioned there would be 2 recesses a day, as you've already reported to us several times, as well as a 3rd mask break per se, and teachers will then also decide if they need more mask breaks, et cetera. Is that's operational, right? That's basically what the day will feel like?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anything else?
Thank you, Rob,
Okay,
for
sure.
letting that discussion take
Do
place.
we have a
I appreciate it.
non-public scheduled?
Nope, we don't need a non-public.
I will take a motion to adjourn by roll call.
So moved by Carol.
Second.
Okay, by roll.
Tammy, aye.
Amy.
Carol, I.
Brooke, aye.
Amy?
Amy, aye.
Rob, aye. Thank you, everyone, and good luck with the opening.